wacana kepada kita semua tentang apa dan bagaimana penerapannya. Untuk tidak memperpanjang waktu, saya panggil Bapak Indriyatno Banyumurti, mewakili ICT Watch untuk memberikan welcoming speech kepada para peserta yang sudah hadir pagi hari ini. Silakan Pak.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Pertama-tama saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada rekan-rekan, Bapak Ibu sekalian yang telah meluangkan waktunya hadir dalam acara ini. Dan for the Honorable Professor Wolfgang Schulz, thank you for your allowed to come to give the lecture to community. And media sosial kian menjadi medium yang memanas, pesan dan gagasan hingga debat kusir tiada akhir, menjadi calon petri untuk menimbulkan inspirasi pun sekaligus mampu mengerdilkannya. Yang menarik adalah pada dasarnya setiap media sosial mempunyai community standar komunitas yang sebenarnya seharusnya dipahami dan dipatuhi oleh para penggunanya. Pertanyaannya, di ruangan ini saja, berapa banyak yang membaca dengan clear semua community standar yang di platform media sosial yang dipakai? Ada yang benar-benar baca, Bapak Ibu? Ya, biasanya kita agree, yes, terus sorot paling bawah, agree, submit ya. Jadi community standar menjadi hal yang terlewatkan oleh para penggunanya. Padahal penegakan standar komunitas ini sendiri menjadi tantangan bagi para platform pengguna, bagi para platform media sosial yang kita gunakan. Kami dari ICT Watch pernah diundang untuk menghadiri beberapa diskusi terkait standar komunitas ini oleh para penyedia layanan platform raksasa seperti Facebook, Twitter, dan juga YouTube. Dan yang menarik adalah memang diskusi-diskusi yang muncul ketika membahas standar komunitas ini menimbulkan persepsi yang berlainan, baik dari pesertanya maupun dari penyedia platformnya sendiri. Ada beberapa community standar di standar komunitas yang ada dalam platform tersebut yang cukup bias, yang bisa dipersepsikan bermacam-macam. Contohnya kemarin tahun lalu saya menghadiri sebuah pertemuan untuk policy sebuah platform media sosial. Di sana ada diskusi menyampaikan beberapa kasus. Ada kasus misalnya yang menarik waktu itu yang kemudian membuat para pesertanya sedikit tertawa, adalah ada sebuah postingan dari penggunanya yang kebetulan pengguna tersebut adalah transgender. Dan dia foto topless. Ya. Apakah ini masuk ketelanjangan atau tidak? Kalau diperhatikan, ini platform media sosialnya Facebook ya, saya sebutkan saja. Di community standar itu disebutkan tidak boleh menampilkan ketelanjangan, deskripsi ketelanjangannya ada. Tidak boleh menampilkan, mohon maaf, puting payudaranya wanita. Nah kemudian waktu itu ditanya ke pesertanya, jadi kalau seperti ini kira-kira melanggar, kita harus take down nggak kontennya? Rata-rata peserta jawab ya take down dong. Ternyata oleh Facebook, oh enggak. Karena ini adalah bukan puting payudara perempuan, tapi transgender. Itu contoh unit label. Belum lagi misalnya terkait kalau ngomong terorisme, Taliban di Afghanistan misalnya, termasuk di dalam jajaran organisasi teroris. Tetapi di Afghanistan sendiri, Taliban merupakan partai politik. Ketika ada postingan warga Taliban yang menyatakan bahwa mempromosikan partai Taliban dalam pemilunya, apakah itu termasuk promo terorisme? Itu menjadi beberapa hal yang menarik yang dibahas juga. Kemudian waktu sempat juga kita di diskusi di Twitter, sama misalnya di Twitter juga bertanya, kira-kira akun Donald Trump itu perlu di-ban apa enggak? Karena sering sekali menyampaikan ujaran kebencian. Misalnya. Nah, hal-hal tersebut memang akhirnya menjadi bias, menjadi debat dari para pengambil keputusan, dan di platformnya sendiri memang itu menjadi tantangan sendiri. Kami juga di ICT Watch diminta menjadi bagian dari YouTube Trusted Flagger. Jadi ada beberapa organisasi di Indonesia yang bisa melaporkan dan mendapatkan prioritas ketika melaporkan konten video di YouTube. Setiap bulannya kita melaporkan sekitar 300 sampai dengan 500 konten video, dan yang benar-benar di take down itu hanya sekitar 70-80%. Sisanya ada yang pakai age restriction atau memang tidak dihapus sama sekali, tidak diperlakukan apa-apa sama sekali. Menariknya, ada kelakuan YouTuber Indonesia yang upload konten-konten yang viral. Benar kan kalau misalnya kita ngomong ada konten tawuran misalnya. Itu satu yang ngupload, tiba-tiba dalam waktu 1 jam bisa puluhan video serupa percis diupload oleh orang yang berbeda. Yang menarik adalah ketika kita laporkan satu, kadang-kadang yang satu di take down, kita laporkan video yang sama belum tentu di take down. Jadi kadang-kadang hanya dikasih age restriction. Jadi bias dari para pengambil keputusan juga mengambil peran yang cukup penting ketika kita berbicara terkait dengan kebijakan konten yang ada di platform media sosial. Melihat kondisi seperti ini, yang menjadi pertanyaan, sebenarnya perlu nggak sih pemerintah ikut menambah dalam tanda kutip regulasi terkait konten di media sosial? Pemerintah Jerman telah memiliki Network Enforcement Act atau NetzDG yang akan dibahas pada kesempatan kali ini, yang mencoba melakukan rekayasa tata kelola internet agar sosmed tidak menjadi Dracula penghisap darah demokrasi di negaranya, tetapi di sisi lain ada kepedulian agar kebebasan berekspresi tak lantas rentan terberangus oleh kebijakan yang mengatur sosmed tersebut. Akan tetapi penerapan NetzDG ini sendiri juga tidak bebas kritik. Banyak kritik-kritik yang muncul yang dianggap juga bahwa regulasi ini mencederai penegakan hak asasi manusia dan lain sebagainya. Oleh karena itu, pada kesempatan yang berbahagia ini kita telah hadir di antara kita Profesor Wolfgang Schulz yang akan bisa menambah wawasan kita tentang regulasi NetzDG ini, tantangannya saat diterapkan di negara Jerman, dan mungkin juga bisa membandingkan internet di Indonesia disandingkan dengan dinamika pengaturan medsos yang ada di dunia, khususnya di Jerman saat ini. Kemudian bagaimana sebaiknya Indonesia mengadopsi dinamika tata kelola internet dalam konteks pengaturan media sosial. Jadi ada 2 event sebenarnya pada hari ini. Yang pertama kuliah umum, dan nanti siang ada focus group discussion dengan mengundang beberapa para pemangku kepentingan gemuk, multi stakeholders, yang mencoba mendiskusikan lebih detail terkait hal tersebut. Oleh karena itu, kami dari ICT Watch pertama menyampaikan apresiasi setinggi-tingginya kepada Profesor Wolfgang Schulz yang berkenan meluangkan waktunya untuk berbagi pengalaman terkait. Thank you very much, Mr. Prof. Dan juga buat para peserta yang hadir pada kesempatan ini, dan selaku penyelenggara kami mohon maaf jika memang dalam penyelenggaraan kegiatan ini nanti ada hal yang kurang berkenan. Semoga event ini bisa menjadi hal yang bisa kita dapatkan manfaatnya terkait dengan tata kelola internet Indonesia. Tak ada gading yang tak retak, yang ada sekarang gading yang ditinggal Gisel. Selamat mengikuti kuliah. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Loh, MC-nya hilang. Berikutnya dengan hormat kami minta perwakilan dari Kementerian Komunikasi dan Informatika, Pak Pancat, untuk dapat menyampaikan sambutan pada kegiatan ini. Terima kasih. Kita kasih aplaus untuk Pak Pancat.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bapak dan Ibu-Ibu sekalian, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semuanya. Yang saya hormati Mr. Wolfgang Schulz, selamat pagi. Pertama kali saya ucapkan syukur kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa bahwa pada pagi hari ini sesuai rencana bisa dilaksanakan acara kuliah umum tentang nanti mungkin tentang NetGG yang benar banyak di Jerman ya. Perkembangan teknologi di 5 tahun terakhir ini memang sangat pesat, terutama sektor TIK. Kalau kita zaman dulu itu yang namanya orang bicara, saya ingat waktu kecil ada film ya, ngomong dari arloji, terus ada secara langsung ada videonya, kita ini bilang, wah khayal gitu ya. Tapi saat ini sudah terjadi, kan seperti itu. Demikian mudah peralatan-peralatan device, peralatan TIK yang memudahkan orang untuk berkomunikasi. Sangat mudah didapatkan, sangat begitu murah dengan akses internet yang begitu cepat. Kalau zaman dulu kita berkomunikasi secara manual, artinya harus bertatap muka, face to face. Saat ini dengan dibantu oleh peralatan-peralatan tersebut, apa yang kita ucapkan saat ini bisa terdengar di jauh di benua, bahkan mungkin di Jerman, di Eropa bisa langsung terdengar. Begitu pula informasi-informasi yang kita sampaikan. Kalau dahulu untuk menyampaikan informasi harus tatap muka seperti ini ya, informasi apa saja. Sekarang sudah difasilitasi oleh peralatan-peralatan tersebut. Dan memang banyak manfaat dari peralatan-peralatan yang timbul dari perkembangan teknologi. Tetapi perlu diingat, ibaratnya pisau bermata dua. Pisau itu kalau untuk mengiris, untuk masak, bisa menyajikan makanan yang enak. Tetapi kalau dipakai untuk hal-hal yang tidak semestinya, maka akan menjadikan kerugian bagi umat manusia. Demikian pula ini. Teknologi komunikasi yang sekarang begitu difasilitasi dengan internet broadband, penyebaran informasi yang tidak terkendali. Di dunia internet, informasi-informasi yang masuk, apabila itu bisa kita pilah-pilah, kita filter, pasti bermanfaat bagi kita. Mempelajari teknologi, untuk transportasi, dan sebagainya. Tetapi apabila yang masuk itu adalah yang kita baca adalah informasi-informasi yang bersifat yang tidak berguna atau sampah, maka tentu akan merugikan kita semuanya. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, ada kurang lebih 800.000 situs yang menyebarkan informasi-informasi yang tidak berguna, baik itu ujaran kebencian ataupun informasi bohong ya, di Indonesia. Dari beberapa sumber waktu saya 800.000. Dengan pengguna internet di Indonesia kurang lebih dari 100 juta, mungkin 150 juta atau bahkan 200 juta. Tentu hal ini sangat memprihatinkan apabila informasi-informasi yang tidak berguna, apakah ujaran kebencian atau hoax atau berita bohong itu diakses oleh pengguna internet Indonesia begitu banyak, tanpa filtering dan tanpa apapun. Dan informasi ini, peringkat pertama penyebaran informasi ini paling besar disebarkan melalui media sosial yang sekarang sudah banyak, entah itu melalui Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, dan lain sebagainya. Banyak isu sensitif yang disebarkan melalui informasi ini. Ranking paling tinggi dari waktu saya ngobrol dengan Direktorat Pengendalian dari Subdit Pemblokiran Konten. Ranking yang menduduki paling tinggi adalah isu-isu politis, terutama di tahun-tahun politis ini ya, menjelang Pilpres. Pengalaman pada waktu menjelang Pilkada, itu aduan-aduan konten yang paling tinggi adalah berkaitan dengan politis. Kemudian pornografi, lantas judi online. Tetapi begitu pilkada selesai, yang menduduki ranking pertama kembali aduan pornografi, lantas judi online. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian yang saya hormati, penyebaran informasi bohong atau hoax, kemudian ujaran kebencian dan yang lain-lain, banyak hal latar belakang kenapa itu tumbuh. Ada yang hanya sekedar iseng, ada yang memang sengaja untuk menjatuhkan lawan bisnis, ada yang bersifat politis dan sebagainya. Nah, bagaimana kita harus mengantisipasi ini? Pertama, kewajiban dari pemerintah itu adalah ya dari sisi teknologi, misalkan yang sudah dilaksanakan kan adanya filtering konten. Yang kedua mungkin bisa dengan literasi, yaitu edukasi seperti ini. Pada pagi hari ini kita mungkin nanti akan mendengarkan dari sisi regulasi yang diterapkan di pemerintahan Jerman, yaitu dengan XGC nanti, dan ini jadi pembelajaran pula bagi Kominfo nantinya seperti apa sih untuk benchmarknya. Tahun ini memang ada sudah punya rumah, kita mengharuskan rumah Anda harus bersih. Meregulit platform media sosial yang ada di Indonesia agar mereka juga ikut bertanggung jawab, agar apa istilahnya platform media sosial itu bisa ya kita berusaha agar mungkin 100% nggak bisa, tetapi paling tidak kita udah berusaha agar rumah itu jadi bersih. Dan akhirnya kami ucapkan selamat mengikuti kuliah umum, mudah-mudahan bermanfaat bagi kita semua. Kominfo bekerja sama dengan IDIGF, juga ICT Watch dan lain-lain, community literasi digital dan yang lain. Kita selalu untuk berusaha mengedukasi masyarakat juga agar kita menjadikan bahwa internet itu menjadi memang sesuatu yang bermanfaat bagi kita. Jadi kita filter hal-hal yang tidak berguna, kita kita bersihkan dari dunia internet semaksimal mungkin dan kita bisa memetik semuanya dari internet. Sekian dari kami, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Pak Pancat, dan kita langsung lanjut menuju sambutan dari Bapak Garin Gani selaku MAG IDIGF Indonesia Internet Governance Forum. Kami persilahkan Pak Garin.
Selamat pagi, Bapak-bapak, Ibu-ibu, salam sejahtera. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hari ini untuk menyambung bahwa di Indonesia sebenarnya sudah ada komunitas yang cukup berkembang 5 tahun ini, multi stakeholder. Saya ingin sedikit memaparkan komunitas yang namanya IDIGF. Mungkin agar nyambung dengan speaker utama, saya akan coba bicara bahasa Inggris. Saya baru tahu bahwa ternyata ada terjemahan, tapi mungkin lebih mudah bagi saya menggunakan beberapa term jargon di bahasa Inggris. So I'll be speaking in English, Professor Wolfgang. So welcome to Jakarta. I think this is the first time, no, the second time. Yeah, I mean you were here last year. So I'm going to give you a certain update with the involvement of Indonesian in the Internet Governance Forums. So as we can see, it's a global multi-stakeholder platforms driving for the policy based on this many interests in the industries to come to terms how to manage or govern the internet, because this has been loosely. A little bit on the platforms. We have yearly meetings in various places in the world. So there is a designated countries for every year of this Internet Governance Forums. And the MEG, which is the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, was established by the United Nations in 2006. It consists of like 55 members, and we held 3 yearly meetings, in which the first one will be the general internet governance. Next. So this is some of the timeline that we have run into. So as you can see, 2006 the first awareness that it used to be American-centric base is now belong to the world. So there has to be more involvement from various countries in order to, speed up the development and force. So on the 2007, Indonesia has the Bali. If you see the subjects, most of the subject was developments and so forth. So we push an idea of building, because it's not internet early technological driven ecosystems. We realize we to integrate with economy issue. We have to integrate with the social, culture, politics, as well as actually policy, which is and the final 2008. Oh, thanks. Hello. In 2018, last year, we start discussing about internet trust. But beyond this, actually, beyond these discussions, what you call the recurring theme is all about hate news, fake news, hoax, and was driven by the 2016 infamous presidential elections in the U.S. I think that's the. I think we agree on that, right? That's the first major problems and impacting election and everything. So, just getting into some perspective on the internet governance. Next, please. This is the way. Next, please. This is the way currently how we perceive the development of internet governance worldly. So it was started with legal policies, and then beneath that there is an infrastructures, technical infrastructures, and then goes through social culture as well as economics. For development, we don't have much say in Indonesia yet, because we don't actually develop the protocols. And the latest, like cybersecurity, human rights, it's getting into right now to the Indonesian version of internet governance. Next. So if you look at the Indonesian version of internet governance, not just the policy issue that is the main topics, but because we declare that we were thinking of bridging the gap, building the bridge. We start with the lower. This is very natural things. Going to infrastructures for the first 2-3 discussions, technical issue only. And of course, there is other issue, development in the law, economic, but everything is pivoting toward this infrastructure standardizations. And as we grow and we improve understanding, we start linking up and make a real case out of the social culture group, economical group, and just an update during the 2016, we actually start bridging the gaps by first starting a discussion with the representative of the social cultures, actually people from Perpustakaan Nasional, Pustakawan, the librarians. We make progress where we aligned with them through same stages, and a bit I'm sharing with you now. We are planning to actually do our own web testing together, and then also the development of another areas that I think it's important. That is pushing another topics from social group history. is all going toward, okay, this is in Bahasa Indonesia, just for example, the social budaya, the social group is talking about together to fight hoax. And the youth IDIGF, this is our new features within IDIGF, these young generations. They are talking about hatred, speech, as well as freedom. So if you see, out of the 2018 last years, we are probing now toward these directions. With some of the solution from my own groups, the internet infrastructures, we're talking about robustness and resilience, because in order to do a lot more on filtering hoax and everything with some of the plans, we really have to have a robust network, measurable, and we don't have it yet there. So I guess this is our slide, last slide. I think we as an Indonesian community, I think I'm trying to socialize that there is an existence of this Indonesian internet governments that will become a platform for communication between law people, the social group, and the economic groups, so that the discussions will have a quick wins that we can also enjoy. So it's not just talking about policy, and there is no basis to actually put that into workable solution, but rather we're going from the infras. We're now talking about locally, we're talking about the economic people from the groups, we're talking about social people, and making progress with a bunch of testbed. For references, final for those who want to explore more on the internet governance, next. No. Yang di buku. Move back, Pak. Terus. Okay, there you go. The first one, the reference. For references, you can grab right now most of our discussion based on the book from Professor Jovan Kurbalija. And it's free, you can download it, the last editions. And there's another one, just came in February from Pak Doni ICT Watch. You can also get it. Budiana ada di ruangan? No? Okay. If you want to discuss and align and join the movement at the AGF, because this is one of the local ecosystem that is linked up with the government. So I think they are more, they listen more if you come from a community that's actually consists of multi-stakeholders. I think that's all from my opening right now. So in that, again, I welcome you for the lectures, and thank you very much, Professor Wolfgang, for coming to Indonesia. Thank you again.
Agak Ganis. Yang terakhir akan kita dengarkan sambutan dari Youth IDIGF yang versi anak mudanya. Kali ini akan dibacakan oleh Mbak Ellen.
Terima kasih Mbak Biduri. Selamat pagi teman-teman semua.
Aku siswi kelas 12.
Oh, belum Mas. Nanti ya videonya. First of all, thank you for coming to this event, and also for ICT Watch and also LSAM and the other organization that supports this event and who invites Professor Wolfgang Schulz. I am Ellen. I'm from the youth of Internet Governance Forum Indonesia. We are just founded last year. And we would like to say something about our participation in this discussion. But before, I would love for you guys to enjoy this video before I make my speech. Thank you. Videonya tolong
Aku
diputar.
lahir tahun 2000, orang-orang menyebut generasiku generasi Z. Dibanding generasi ayah dan kakekku, aku kayaknya lebih beruntung deh. Dengan gadget di tangan, aku bisa mengakses banyak informasi, main game, streaming film, dengerin musik favorit, sampai pesan makanan kesukaan. Teman-temanku banyak, bukan cuma di dunia nyata, tapi juga di dunia maya. Bukan cuma dari Indonesia, tapi seluruh dunia. Karena terhubung dengan dunia yang luas, seharusnya generasiku lebih terbuka, termasuk dalam sikap beragama. Tapi, benarkah begitu? Untuk mengenali lebih dalam generasiku, para peneliti PPIM UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta melakukan survei nasional kepada ribuan muslim generasi Z, juga kepada guru-guru dan dosen kami di 34 provinsi. Selama sebulan lebih, para peneliti bekerja keras mengumpulkan dan menganalisis data dengan tingkat ketelitian yang tinggi. Penelitian ini ingin mengetahui bagaimana muslim generasiku melihat agama, keragaman, negara, serta bagaimana pendidikan agama membentuk cara berpikir kami. Dan inilah beberapa hasilnya. Ternyata, lebih dari sepertiga teman muslim segenerasiku setuju kalau jihad itu kital, alias perang, terutama perang melawan non-muslim. 1 dari 5 siswa muslim setuju kalau aksi teror bom bunuh diri itu jihad Islam. Sepertiga muslim Gen Z setuju kalau orang yang murtad harus dibunuh. Hampir sepertiga merasa bahwa perbuatan intoleran terhadap minoritas gak masalah. Melihat data di atas, kaget juga sih, dari mana pemahaman-pemahaman itu berasal. Ternyata, medsos masih menjadi rujukan utama generasi kami dalam mendapatkan ilmu dan informasi keislaman. Buku pelajaran agama Islam juga berperan. Hasil survei menunjukkan 48,95% siswa atau mahasiswa merasa pendidikan agama memiliki porsi yang besar dalam mempengaruhi kami agar tidak bergaul dengan pemeluk agama lain. Dari keseluruhan materi pendidikan agama Islam, materi tentang menghargai orang lain yang berbeda itu porsinya sedikit banget. Mangga jatuh nggak jauh dari pohonnya. Cara pandang yang eksklusif ini nggak jauh dengan guru dan dosen kami. Misalnya, untuk urusan dengan kelompok minoritas yang dianggap sesat, sebagian besar guru dan dosen tidak setuju jika pemerintah melindungi kelompok tersebut. 2/3 guru dan dosenku percaya bahwa semua orang Yahudi adalah musuh-muslim dan semua orang Yahudi membenci muslim. Untuk urusan rumah ibadah agama lain, 2/3 dari guru dan dosen tidak setuju kalau di lingkungan mereka didirikan rumah ibadah agama lain. Sedih rasanya kalau lihat data-data tadi. Seharusnya, pendidikan agama membuat kami mencintai dan melindungi sesama manusia. Apalagi 20-30 tahun dari sekarang, generasi kamilah yang akan memimpin bangsa ini. Bangsa yang kaya dengan keragaman. Gak mungkin bangsa besar ini dipimpin oleh orang yang berpikiran sempit. Tapi, aku tetap optimis kok. Sebagian besar generasi kami masih setia Pancasila dan NKRI. Temuan survei ini membuka mata kami untuk waspada dan introspeksi. Udah banyak bangsa porak-poranda karena benih kebencian yang dibiarkan. Ayo, jaga bangsa kita, Indonesia yang kita cinta.
Okay. Maybe some of you have seen the videos before, but I want to play it here just for a background, also for Professor Wolfgang. This video is a research that shows the generation Z of Indonesia is very, very, how do you say, they are living in the internet era. They are doing everything, all of their activities is connected to the internet. This is a fact. But also, as can be seen from the video, the threat is the intolerant seeds doesn't only come from the internet, but also from our offline activities. And intolerance realize in hate speeches, online hate speeches, and the online and offline become tangled, intertwined. The lives of online lives and offline lives is intertwined. And so, also I would like to make a remark that in 2016, Indonesia ranked second lowest of 61 countries for the literacy rate. This makes Indonesia become prone to hoax. But hoaxes, younger generation have skills to identify hoax, have skills to fight against hoax. Who doesn't have it is the digital immigrant or the older people in Indonesia. There is research that shows that older generation is more prone to spread hoaxes than the younger generation. However, the way people talk about hoax, people fight against hoax, make younger generation become antipathy. Either they are against hoax or they just ignore hoaxes in their lives and just move on with their lives. This is also a problem because it shows a lack of participation, lack of willingness to do something about this. So I would like to maybe ask to Professor Wolfgang how the younger generation or the youth participate in the talk of internet governance in German. How they respond to the NetzDG. Also, how really to balance the regulation between regulating and respecting freedom of speech. And last, I would like to say, social media isn't a matter of a platform, just a platform to socialize and communicate or connect with people, but it's literally a tangle of lives of people from different backgrounds or different and of different cultures. So this is if we are talking about internet governance, we are not only talking about platforms, regulating platforms. We are talking about regulating people's lives, and this is very complicated because the diverse background, the diverse cultures. How do we maintain the balance between that? And as a representative for youth IDGF, I would like to say youth and even younger generation are in the middle of this. And we will be living it for many, many years to come. More than the people who made the regulation right now. So, I would like to say, this is a call for people in here, Kominfo also, our parents, IDIGF, to include us, youth, to invite us and talk to us and let us participate in the discussion of internet governance. Also, this is a shout out for youth here. I see many younger faces here. This is a shout out to you guys. Let's include ourselves, let's invite ourselves, let's participate in the discussion of internet governance. Let's not be ignorant of these things. Okay, so that's my remark. I would like to say thank you for Professor Wolfgang for giving a lecture after this. Thank you.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Ella, dan itu merupakan sambutan terakhir dari Youth IDIJF, dan kami undang Mbak Afra Suci untuk ke depan sebagai moderator. Saya serahkan acara ini ke Mbak Afra, dan kami persilahkan Profesor Dr. Wolfgang untuk dapat mempresentasikan kuliahnya. Silahkan.
Yeah, this works. Everything okay. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the invitation to talk here about the German approach on fighting disinformation and hate speech online. It's a great honor for me to be here. I'm here to learn also about your ideas and your approaches, and I learned already a lot from the first remarks here. For example, to talk more with the young people in Germany about regulations like this is definitely a good idea. I think it has not been done so far, not on a systematical level, but we have reached out to the younger generation to see what they believe is a good approach to these issues. I'm not a salesman for German laws, to say that. I'm an academic. I'm researching this field from a legal point of view, but our institutes also do empirical work, and we want to do some empirical work on the evaluation of the effects of the Network Enforcement Act of the NetzDG. Maybe I can come back in a couple of months and tell you about the actual effects that we have measured here, but we don't have figures about that right now. I'm working with a couple of institutions in Germany. That's the Leibniz Institute for Media Research and the Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society, and I also hold the chair on freedom of communication and information of UNESCO. You, in the invitation, you were kind enough to point to my work with the Council of Europe as well. I will come to that in a minute. So can I have the next slide, please? Just 4 steps, just 4 things I wanted to bring across to you. The first one is I would like to talk briefly about dangerous speech online. What makes that different? Why do we have to think about things like NetzDG? The second one is, of course, to show you what we have done in Germany, the Network Enforcement Act. Everybody in the internet sphere is talking about that. Many countries think about copying it. Some have copied parts of it already and have that in the law books. So it might be interesting for you to learn what the law actually says and the first experience that we have made with this law. The second enforcement reports have been published a couple of weeks ago, so I can talk about that as well. I will give you my assessment of this solution in Germany. Where are the upsides, where are the downsides from my academic point of view. And finally, I will tell you, because I criticize parts of the NetzDG and people ask me, what shall we do then? If you are not supporting this approach, then at the end I will give you a flavor of what my idea would be, how to approach the issue of dangerous speech online. So that's what I'm going to do in a couple of minutes, and I hope you stay with me for half an hour, 45 minutes. Next slide, please. Next one. The first thing we have to remember is that when we talk about fake news and fake news in elections, which is something that people care about especially and find problematic especially, we are talking about a rather old phenomenon. You here see a picture of Jefferson and Adams, who had their election campaigns in 1800 in the US. And, next slide please. When you look into the files there, then you see that at one point near the election, the team around Adams spread the rumor that Jefferson had suddenly died. And it's no use to vote for him anymore because he's dead. And we would say, what is the problem? People can get the information soon that he is still alive and vote for him, but remember the communications infrastructure at that day. You did not have electronic media, you did not use the internet and see what does your community say, oh, it's fake, you can vote for Jefferson still. There was the risk that this rumor was still present when people are moving to the election booth. And so this hoax, this misinformation could have had severe effects. Next slide. So the first point is that we have to think what difference does the infrastructure, the communication infrastructure we have right now make in terms of the effect that dangerous speech can have. And I have 7 points, might even be more, but I will just introduce 7 points, where I believe that online communication, fake hate or other dangerous speech online, makes a difference from offline and from traditional forms of distributing news. The first one is the time factor that I've mentioned with Adam and Jefferson. That is how fast travels news. And fake information, but other parts of other sorts of information as well. And we know that information online can go viral and that in seconds or in minutes information is spread from platform to platform, and even an action on one platform cannot correct that if you want to do that and you see that it is false information. So the first thing is acceleration. We are dealing with speed of information transmission that we have not seen before, faster than the traditional news cycle of traditional media, where at the next day you could have new information and the reader of a newspaper could see the correct information the next day. We are talking about different time scales here. The second one is the sheer volume of content. If you take Facebook alone, we are talking about 14 million of takedowns of terrorist content every year. 14 million pieces of content, the last figures I read. And that's only terrorist content. We have other types of dangerous speech as well. So we are talking about numbers where you cannot simply say the judicial system should deal with that. They cannot deal with 14 million cases for a specific issue alone. That will not work. We cannot just say a takedown can only be made when there has been a court procedure. The judicial system cannot cope with that. So we have the sheer volume, I would say, of the speech acts that we are dealing with. The next thing that is important is the attribution problem, as I call it. Online, you very often do not really know who the author is, the actual author is. We have anonymity online, at least on some platforms, that is allowed. You have things that spread from one platform to the other, and you don't know anymore who is the actual speaker here. And that, of course, makes legal action that is targeting at the speaker problematic, because sometimes you cannot really know who the speaker actually is, or it's very costly, or it violates data protection laws to know who the speaker actually is. The next one is lack, or I would say limited social control. I think there are studies out there showing that the behavior online, especially in communities where anonymity is the rule, that social control does not work in the same way it does offline. So that you refrain from doing something which is socially not acceptable. That can be good in times, because we want maybe people to disclose things at the workplace that they would not dare to disclose when people know that they are the people speaking. But in other circumstances, when it comes to hate, when it comes to offend people, then that, of course, can create a problem. Observability is a thing that is extremely important, I would say, when we talk about speech online. What do I mean with that? I mean that in former times we had small groups discussing with their own rules, with their own language, with their own style, and it was among them. And there was no harm done to other people hearing that. But now this is, at least on specific platforms, observable for others, maybe for the whole world. And they might be offended, they don't understand the language, they don't understand the rules that are enforced there in this community. And so an additional problem occurs to the observability issue. Then we have the issue of persistence. You know the saying, the internet does not forget. Maybe that's not really true, but on the other hand, it is true that there is a specific persistence of content there, and that you can find something offensive that has been said about you years ago, and someone is now finding that and maybe holds that against you, or it makes a bad impression now. And the final thing, jurisdiction problems. We are dealing with a basically global phenomenon where we are talking about internet communication, and so we of course have a lot of jurisdictional issues we do not have normally in the analog world, because some speech might be illegal in one place and legal in another place, and a lot of projects and initiatives are dealing with that. Many of you might be familiar with the Internet Jurisdiction Network, which does a lot of, I think, excellent work on dealing with these issues of making the different legal orders at least compatible in this field. There will be a conference where suggestions are presented in Berlin, so we are very happy in Berlin to have a kind of internet governance year. We have this conference, we are hosting the IGF, which is great, and so many things will be happening in Germany in terms of internet governance. Next slide, please. And the next one. So, we see this extreme high number of dangerous speech. We have these problems I have mentioned. How does it come that Germany adopted this approach of the Network Enforcement Act that we are talking about today? I will just give you some information about the climate, the political climate that led to the German government and the German parliament to enact this law. These are only some triggers, of course, but I think important one. The first one has been mentioned already. We had this election of President Trump in the US and the allegations that fake news might have played a role in the outcome of this election. That was very much heavily discussed in Germany before the German general election in 2017. So that was one of the triggers that I said members of parliament were afraid that they have worked so hard to get their seat in parliament, and maybe one day before the election there is some fake spreading and takes the victory out of their hands. And that was definitely one of the fears that they had, combined with the growing importance of a far-right party we have in Germany, the Alternative for Germany, and they produce a lot of hate, and people say that the political climate in Germany, which has been very calm in the last years, very, very, some say boring, others say that is a very cultivated political discourse that has been in Germany, but that has changed dramatically, and the Alternative for Germany has some stake in that. The next thing was a very individual development that happened, and that was that there was a very problematic piece of a fake quotation, where people said she was in favor of immigrants coming to Germany even if they are terrorists. And that was, of course, not true. The chairwoman of the Judicial Committee from the Green Party in Germany, and she was furious, and she tried to reach someone with Facebook and was not successful. She said that nobody at Facebook was really answering and doing something, and that was one of the triggers where the politicians in Germany said that cannot be true, that Facebook offers this kind of platform which has become so important for public and political communication in Germany, and they do not really answer to these kind of requests. There is no adequate complaints mechanisms in place, and that has to be changed. That was one of the things that many politicians at that time, and maybe still, are discussing. And the last one, next slide please, was this. You might recognize that it's the Chancellor of Germany still, Angela Merkel, and you might know that we had this discussions in Germany about refugees, especially from Syria, and that Mrs. Merkel took the decision, not she alone, but she was very much the driver there, not to close the German borders, and so nearly 1 million of refugees from Syria came to Germany, and that was heavily criticized, especially from the right-wing parties. And then there was a photo where she was, there was a selfie taken by one of the refugees, and some right-wing groups took this photo and said, Merkel has taken a selfie with a terrorist. And there was no proof at all that this guy is a terrorist, it was just misinformation, what was spread about the networks and the platforms. And that was again one of the things where people said, we have to stop that. That is something that cannot be allowed online, that this kind of fake is damaging the reputation of Merkel, but also, of course, is damaging to the honor of the refugee here, who definitely has nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. Next slide, please. So, after that, in a very fast parliamentary process, the parliament in Germany adopted the Network Enforcement Act in summer 2017, and it became fully applicable at the beginning of the last year. So we have now 13 months of experience with this new law. Next slide, please. So let me very briefly introduce the concept of the German regulation. First of all, and that's important, and that I think is something the German lawmaker has done well, they did not try to define hate speech or fake news, which is very, very hard. You might know, when you are familiar with this debate, that even academic papers have a huge problem in defining what that actually is. And it's very blurry, and you can have some really substantial discussions about the nature of truth when you talk about fake news, for example, because some things might be obviously fake, but other things you can argue about that, or you don't know at the specific moment whether it's true or not, and what does that actually mean. So what the law actually does is, it does not say hate speech has to be removed or fake news has to be removed, but it refers to existing, not changed, unchanged, criminal offenses under the German Penal Code. And that is supporting terrorism, for example, that is libel, that is other forms of defamation, and so on. So it's a long list of criminal offenses, but it is an existing list of laws. So the vagueness that comes into it when you address fake or hate does not come in here, not at least at this point. And I think that's extremely important, because we are talking about regulating speech, and that means that you have to have clear-cut rules in order to hinder regulators or governments to use it in a political way, but just in a way to protect the rights of others and the rights of the community. There is a definition of what is a social media provider. I will skip that, but we can talk about that if you are interested. And the main obligation that is imposed on the platforms under this law is that they have to maintain an effective and transparent procedure to handling complaints. That is the core of the law. It is not directly saying do this or that in terms of specific types of content. It's saying you need to have an effective and transparent procedure handling complaints. And you see, coming back to the problem the chairwoman of the Judicial Committee had, that was exactly addressing that problem. Facebook should be forced to have a mechanism in place that when someone complains that he or she fall victim to hate, for example, that there is someone answering and there is a structured procedure to assess whether that's legal or not legal. And then, now it becomes controversial, and then the law says this complaints mechanism has to make sure that obviously unlawful content is removed within 24 hours. So that's quite steep. That you have this time frame, and we'll come to the discussion about that later on. There is the notion that when it is not obviously illegal, but also illegal, that 7 days are okay for, next slide please, 7 days are okay for checking the legality of the content, and that may even exceed the 7 days in very complicated cases. There is, I can come to that later on if you find that interesting, there is a clause in the law saying that the providers do not have to make all the decisions by themselves. They can opt for a self-regulatory body to do that. Some countries have that for other purposes, for protecting youth in the internet, for example, and then these institutions can be used, and that was the idea of the German lawmaker, that if a company does not want to do all the decisions by themselves, they can somehow outsource it and make use of self-regulation. They have to name a specific person in Germany, not somewhere in California or wherever, that can receive the complaints, and there is a state body supervising the whole system, and that in Germany is the Federal Office of Justice. Next slide, please. So, furthermore, we have these report obligations. I talked about that already. That's something that I, as an academic, find, of course, extremely helpful, because it gives us some information about what actually happens on the platforms. I will come to that in a minute. Sorry. And we have regulatory fines up to 50 million euros that can be issued in cases of violations. And an interesting thing that has not been observed so far broadly is that it does not need to be done within the borders of Germany for the Network Enforcement Act to be applicable. You know that in many cases it is not really clear where the service is actually delivered, where is actually the content of Facebook Germany put together, and where might this crime be committed. So the law says that does not matter for the application of this law. Next slide, please. So, now I will go through the basic criticism that has been discussed in Germany, and I have to say that the law is still heavily criticized in Germany by many groups, by many NGOs and others. And one of the criticisms is more a technical one, that it is not so easy to define what social media networks actually are. We have some cases like, for example, chat communication within games that might fall within the definition that was not really meant by the lawmaker. They wanted to address the big ones, I guess, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube in Germany, but the definition of a law has to be abstract, of course, and this abstract definition might result in problems. So some companies still do not really know, do I actually have to comply because I am I provide a social media network under the law or not? But the more problematic things have to do with freedom of speech issues, obviously, that have been discussed here. And the main fear of many people is that this law might create overblocking, because for the providers to delete content when there is a complaint is obviously the easiest option. If they delete it after a complaint, no one has the right to say it's legal content, put it up again, with some exceptions, I come to that. But on the other hand, if they just remove it, it's unproblematic, and if they let it up because they say, in doubt we will have it on the platform, then they risk that there is a violation of the law, and that under the Network Enforcement Act, the regulator will say, the supervisory body will say that the complaints procedure does not work properly because this kind of content stays up. One of the problems is here that when we are talking about speech, then we are talking about things where you have to interpret the meaning of what has been said. And to do that, at least in some cases, you need to understand the context, and you need to understand what people actually make out of that. It is not a rare case in Germany that when you have defamation cases, not online, offline, that the district court says, okay, it's okay, freedom of speech covers that, then maybe the district court says, no, or the federal court says, no, we rule otherwise because we assess the context in a different way, and then the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany might have a different view again. That's not rare, that's normal when it comes to speech and questions of legal assessment of speech. Are the providers actually in a situation where they can assess the content in a proper way to make sure that that is understood? A second thing is related with that, if because of the sheer volume the platforms use technology to do that, make use of artificial intelligence to detect or maybe even to filter the content, then we run into the problem that technology, even the highly sophisticated AI, cannot detect irony these days, for example, or critical assessment. Look at the Merkel selfie with the refugee again. You would say, of course, that is violating, it's obvious that that is violating the rights of Merkel and the refugee. But take a blogger, for example, who is talking about this case critically, saying, look, right-wing people are doing this, we have to talk about that, and he or she uses this picture. If you just detect the picture, then you will maybe remove the whole critical blog post on that. And that is not good for freedom of speech. That leaves to some important speech for public communication to be deleted. And you can only assess that when you have a mechanism, be it a human, be it an artificial intelligence, that is capable of seeing what the context actually is. Is somebody affirming that and saying, oh yes, she was taking this picture with a terrorist, or whether that's someone who is critically arguing about this case. Next slide, please. So I leave out the violation of European law that is discussed here in this paragraph at the beginning. The other problem that has been discussed, even in Parliament, is that the Federal Office of Justice, being responsible for the whole system, might create the problem of state interference. That is something that we take very seriously in Germany. You might know that in Nazi Germany there was a very strict state control of broadcasting and censorship, and the German constitution now reflects these horrible experience that Germany has made, and the German Federal Constitutional Court upholds the principle of freedom of the media from state interference in a very prominent way. I had the privilege to argue a case in front of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany on freedom from state interference, and it was good to see that all the judges there had a very clear view on that. The Federal Office of Justice is not an independent entity. We have that for media regulation, but it is directly reporting to the Minister of Justice. So in principle, it's possible that the minister could direct the Federal Office of Justice to do something in this very sensible area. So that's, apart from this major concept of co-regulation, which is a very specific one, I will not flesh out here, but I can do that in the discussion if you are interested in co-regulation. So that's just very, very briefly the main critics that have been uttered when the Network Enforcement Act was coming into effect. We had the vast majorities of academics saying that this law in this shape is problematic. The German media associations, Reporters Without Borders, and several NGOs were critical. And also the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right of freedom of opinion and expression drafted a letter and sent it to the German government because he was concerned. And that does not happen very often in Germany, because we are normally, Germany does not really create problems in terms of freedom of speech. I will not say that everything is in order in Germany, but as regards freedom of speech, I think Germany has quite a good reputation there, and that's why it was so interesting and worrying to see that the UN rapporteur was now drafting a critical letter on the Network Enforcement Act. The next slide, please. So, where are we now? We have a relatively low number of complaints filed with the Federal Office of Justice saying that the companies do not comply. That's surprising. So the companies obviously did their best to work with this law that they obviously do not really like. So far as I know, there have been issued no fines whatsoever, and there might be procedures starting. I will come to that in a minute, why that might be. There was a discussion about having a judicial review of the law. It is possible in Germany that individuals and companies approach the Federal Constitutional Court and challenge the law for being not in line with the German Constitution. As far as I know, the big players, Facebook, Google, have not opted to do so. And there are some individual complaints, but I have my doubts whether these complaints are heard by the Federal Constitutional Court, because for formal reasons they might not be accepted as valid constitutional complaints. That is a pity, that a law in a country like Germany, where many people say it violates freedom of speech, is not being assessed by the Federal Constitutional Court, which role it is to do that, is a problem, but it might be that one way or other the case will end up at the Federal Constitutional Court anyway. The industry is, as far as I know, about to make use of the self-regulatory clause. That's a new development. I think it has not been publicly announced, so keep it to yourself. But we will see this week or the next one that a self-regulatory body will be part of the assessment here in Germany. What is the global stance from the German perspective? The first customer, in inverted commas, to buy the German law was Russia, with explicit reference to the Network Enforcement Act in Germany. That is a concern for us, that people say, oh, if it works in Germany, then it meets the highest standards of rule of law and freedom of speech, and so we can just copy-paste it. I would say no, that is not the case. You can have a close look, you can maybe make use of some of the ideas. I will come to that at my end of the presentation, but I would not really recommend copy-paste approaches. And of course, copy-paste is always a problem when it comes to laws, because the legal context, the culture of political communication in a given country and so on will be completely different in different countries, obviously. And so I think you have to see what the specific problems and issues at your country are before seeing whether an approach from another country, be it Germany or another, is actually something worth considering. Next slide, please. That was an interesting thing, that one of the first things that have been removed when the Network Enforcement Act came in force was opposed by our Minister of Justice. And he fell victim to his own law that some people said that was intentionally by the social media platform to show the public and the minister what the effect can actually be. But that was interesting to see for us in Germany. One of the first public cases from the minister himself. He's not the Minister of Justice anymore, he's now our foreign minister, so maybe you meet him when he's traveling in this region. Next slide, please. So, I said before that it's interesting for us that the law contains the obligation to have these reports twice a year by the platform. So that gives us, researchers and the public, information about the actual effects. What you cannot see is whether that's a correct decision or not. You can just see about what numbers we are talking here. And there are some interesting things when you look at this. That is covering the whole year 2018, so that's a combination of the figures of the first report in July and the report from January 2019. And you can see a lot of things here. You can see that, first of all, we are talking about extremely high numbers, at least when we are talking about Twitter and YouTube. And second thing you can see is that a lot of things are deleted, but it is not so that there is a kind of automatic complaint delete, because you can see that here, take YouTube for example, you have this nearly 500,000 of complaints under the Network Enforcement Act, and you have this number of over 100,000 that have been deleted. So there is a process of assessment here. Whether that means that there is no overblocking or not cannot be methodologically derived from this. You can only see there is a procedure in place. It's not just report and delete. That's a good thing from a freedom of speech perspective, I would say. So that's one thing that you can see from this figure. It's interesting to see this Facebook figure. And it's hard to interpret what that actually means. Why are the figures so low? Are the people all polite on Facebook and just violate the rights of others when they use YouTube? That's not a very, very convincing argument for that. There are several ideas tossed around why this figure is so low. One idea is that the Facebook complaints button for Network Enforcement Act is not so easy to find, not as easy as YouTube, for example. So maybe users that find some stuff offensive just click on the button that this is offensive, and then the procedure starts about whether it violates the community standards or not. And then it is dealt with under the community standards and not under the Network Enforcement Act rules. That is, I think, the most plausible explanation for this low number of complaints with Facebook. Again, I will come to that in a minute. Next slide, please. Next one. So, my assessment is that we are dealing with something which is extremely difficult because of the context sensitivity of speech. And I believe that when we use technology like that, that is used to do the assessment, then we have to know what is at stake to make a proper proportionality test, because we are talking about freedom of speech, possible freedom of speech infringements. So you need to have some real harm done on the one side to say that this kind of measure that the Network Enforcement Act delivers is constitutional. And a little bit of advertising, if you allow for that. The Council of Europe recommendation on intermediaries is something to consider. I was a member of the committee, actually chairman of the committee that drafted this recommendation, and we carefully drafted that to balance freedom of speech on the one hand, and on the other hand the interests that are at stake when it comes to hate or similar things. Next slide, please. So, what is the problem here when we want to do a proper assessment? I think that's the academic speaking again, excuse me. First of all, I think we need to know more about the effects of disinformation and the effect of specific countermeasures. We know already a lot, but not enough. And what you can see is that people are from time to time overestimating the effect of fake news, for example. We do not really know what the effects actually are. From the traditional media research, for example, we have a long time ago got rid of the idea that a person sees something in the newspaper, for example, changes his or her attitude and then votes in a different way. People don't work like that. They have different sources of information. They have their own mindset already, which influences whether you are acting differently when you see a piece of information or not. So it is implausible to assume that here is a piece of fake and then people believe it and vote in a different way. It's not that simple. And we have to better understand. There are some studies there, but I think we have to better understand these effects in order to make proper decisions, policy decisions in this field. So, again, excuse me, as an academic, I need some evidence to work with, and that's not enough what we have here. That goes together with my second point. It sounds boring, but as I used to say, right now taxonomies can save lives. I personally believe that we are putting too many things in the same basket and have a one-size-fits-all political solution. That is also true for the Network Enforcement Act, where we have very different criminal offenses and all the same result at the end. That is especially important when you talk about different cultures, different contexts, political contexts, for example. Let me take two drastic examples which are completely opposite. Germany, on the one hand, where we have not seen a single case, I believe, where some harm to life or the health of a person has come from a piece of fake news. It's a lot about offending people, it's about the political culture in Germany and so on. The last time I talked about disinformation in India, the very day I was there was a fake photo taken of an Hinduist politician, and someone added a plate of beef, and it looked like he was eating beef there. And on the next day, when we had our conference, there were people on the street trying to kill him. And if you compare that, political culture on the one hand, which is important, of course, and on the other hand, the immediate danger of people getting killed from fake, then you see the continuum of different types of harm, and I believe that we need to think more about typologies of that and then come up with proper solutions for one case or another, but not that say we are talking about hate speech and it's all the same and we have all the same answer for that. Third point, I believe that when we do this kind of risk-specific analysis, then we have to do it domain-specific. I think one of the most important things for a democracy is to have free and authentic elections. And how do we protect them? That is one domain where we can think about specific measures against specific forms of dangerous speech. That might be the speech of political parties, what is a kind of unfair communication in an election process, and so on. But I think it's helpful to think in these specific domains and specific risks that we are facing. And the final problem for me as an academic right now is that we always talk about, and we have talked about, chilling effects of the Network Enforcement Act and other laws like that. But it's very hard, even when the law is in effect, to measure that, what the chilling effect actually is. We are thinking about methods to do that, and what we're trying to do is that we have to see whether you have specific types of content where when you have a random test, the next person assessing the content comes to another view as the first person who put it down. If that is the case very often, then I think we can assume that it's at least doubtful whether this is illegal content, and there might be a kind of chilling effect. But it's really hard to establish that, and that makes it so difficult to argue with this chilling effect moment, because you cannot really see that only if you would assess all the pieces of content and you had someone who would, as a judge, for example, an independent judge, saying that is illegal or that is not illegal, and given the amount of content that you know are out there, this approach does not really work. So we have to work with assumptions, with proxies here. We cannot really have hard figures demonstrating chilling effects. Next slide, please. So the lack of knowledge, the problem to assess chilling effects comes from another thing that I have mentioned already when I talked about Facebook. That's something that worries us more and more in research and in policy debates, and that is the entanglement between legal rules and the procedures and rules that the companies have made themselves, the community standards or however they are called. When you have complaints, then it is rational for a company first to check whether it violates its own community standards. And what is possible, I will not say that they do it, but what is possible, that under this rule, they say, in doubt, we delete. And that would mean that it is not the NetzDG directly, but maybe indirectly, that leads to companies removing content more easily. But you cannot really attribute it to the Network Enforcement Act because it is done on the level of community standards. This entanglement becomes more and more complicated. We have countries, for example, where officials do not use the official mechanisms for content removal anymore, but the more easy way for them, and a way that cannot be easily challenged at courts, is that the officials complain and say it violates your community standards, take it down. And then the company has to decide whether, oh, it's a government official, maybe we check twice whether it's not better to take it down. And then you have this unofficial line bypassing the rule of law, I would say, because the proper way would be for a government or an regulator to use its own means. But then the measure, it has to be clear that it does not violate human rights standards, there has to be a clear-cut legal basis, it has to be proportionate and so on. And if you just file a complaint with the private company and see what happens, you can bypass this procedure. I think that's from a rule of law perspective, development that is worrying, to say the least. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, finally, that's my last slide. I've criticized the Network Enforcement Act partly, and I'm asked when I do that, what is your approach? What would you suggest? And I would just give you some ideas of that. They are not completely new, of course, but I think in combination they might work. Next click, please. So the first one is, I think the Network Enforcement Act approach can be something that is helpful when you have cases of imminent risk of grave harm. But I think it's not a one-size-fits-all solution because of the effects I told you and the problems of context sensitivity and so on. But take the Hinduist politician again with the imminent danger of people killing him because there was the fake of him eating beef. Then I think a rule saying that providers are obliged to remove that in 24 hours or even faster is something that is appropriate. Then, of course, one element when it comes to fake can be fact-checking and then just signaling to the user that people have doubt about this source. I think that makes a lot of sense and is easily done as something that is social media adequate to do it this way, and at least then it is clear to all that people have doubted the truth of this specific piece of content. Another thing that is, I think, neglected a little is support for victims who fall victim of hate and fake news, for example. Especially when individuals, marginalized groups, for example. I think it could be a task, and we have discussed that when the Network Enforcement Act was developed, whether or not, with the support of the platforms, there should be an institution that helps people when they have been fallen victim and say, what are effective measures of counter-speech, for example? What are things how it is I can react? Is this a case that is I can bring to court, or is it a case that I should deal with otherwise? I think that's an extremely important thing and not considered so much so far. Another thing, of course, is information literacy, especially including bystanders. What can I do when I see something online happening, hate, for example? What is an appropriate way? What has proven to be effective in former times? I think that's important. I'm always a little reluctant to mention media literacy. It is so important, but in discussions it's very often used as a kind of moving the responsibility to the user. And I frankly don't like this argument. Sometimes you can find that with industry representatives that they say, oh, the user should be better informed and then they can protect themselves. That is true, but I think under this kind of 360-degree approach, everybody has to take his or her responsibility. That is the companies, but it's also the user and bystanders as well. Another thing is, of course, that you should not just say, oh, we remove it from the platform and the offender does not play a role here. In Germany, we have a campaign, an institution is doing that they specifically try to find people uttering hate online, and then they try to prosecute them. And to make clear for others, especially in the right-wing movements, that when you say something online, that is something that has to adhere to the legal rules as well. It's not a free space where laws do not count. And I think people would learn that more when some of their groups feel that their actions have consequences. And what is important also, of course, is to strengthen civil society actors and the media. The media has a great role. In Germany, public service broadcasters have employed many people as fact-checkers. They have fact-checker newsrooms, especially when there is something out. They start checking it and then they use their channels on social media to give their views and say that it is not correct. So that's very briefly what I would think might help. It's more to see who can do what in his or her role and responsibility. And with that, last slide please. I thank you for listening and I'm happy to answer all the questions I can answer on the German law or whatever you want to know. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor Wolfgang, for the elaborative explanations on the NETSDG and also the overview of what we can do next that you offer. Saya akan mempersilahkan teman-teman di peserta untuk memberikan pertanyaan dalam sesi pertama. Bisa 3 pertanyaan dahulu, nanti kita lihat lagi waktunya apakah akan ada kesempatan pertanyaan berikutnya. So I will open first session for the Q&As. I will moderate the session, not moderate the content because I have the position to do so. So please, for the audience, para peserta yang ingin bertanya, boleh 1 pertanyaan Mbak di depan. Kemudian selanjutnya, kedua ada lagi, 1 lagi mungkin baris ini gantian ya. Ini udah 2. Silakan sebutkan nama, mungkin institusi, lalu pertanyaannya, silakan. Silakan yang ingin bertanya bahasa Indonesia, bisa bahasa Indonesia. Kalau ada yang mau langsung bahasa Inggris juga boleh.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Vidya Prahasacita. I'm a lecturer in Binus University, and also now I'm PhD student in University of Indonesia, majoring in criminal law. My focus thesis, my focus dissertation is criminal reformulations about Indonesia criminal policy regarding fake news. My question is, I already reviewed some of the law in several countries, including Germany. Thank you for your presentation, and I want to ask about the new regulation in Germany only cover the network, social media, which is the social network. I want to ask, how about the WhatsApp or chatting, WhatsApp or chat applications? Because it's in Indonesia, we have to see that WhatsApp is one of the medium to spread the fake news itself. And our culture, especially Indonesia, we call it Indonesia society is kepo, or want to share information without to see the content of the news itself. So it makes fake news is more dangerous in Indonesia, maybe not in the US or maybe in Germany. I want to know the perspective law itself to see the chat group, because last year I believe Info just I don't know that the terminology is not shut down, but jammed the Telegram because it's used to spread the terrorist content. I don't know in Germany or your other country. Can you explain further about that? Thank you.
Terima kasih, Mbak Vidya. I will collect three questions, and then Professor Wolfgang will answer. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Alia. I work as a researcher at Institute for Policy Research and Advocacy, known as ALSAM. Actually, my questions was already asked by previous. I'm particularly curious about the disinformations in private platforms, because for some countries like India and Indonesia, disinformation, hate speech are oftentimes disseminated through private messenger like WhatsApp. And as we know that WhatsApp, as a response to this, WhatsApp has put a limit to messages forwarding in order to prevent the virality of the message. And so I'm really curious, what's your view on this? Like, has WhatsApp done the right thing, or there is more effective approaches to this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alia. The next one.
Terima kasih atas kesempatan ini. Nama saya Steven, saya bekerja di lembaga pemantauan media namanya Remon TV. Pertanyaan saya adalah, kalau dari tadi kita lihat yang ditujukan untuk peraturan ini adalah social media networknya sendiri. Sedangkan kalau misalnya kita lihat kan beberapa post itu ada individualnya yang terlibat, yang mengepost itu. Pertanyaan saya, apakah ada hukuman juga bagi orang yang melakukan post yang dianggap melakukan tindakan kriminal, yang melanggar NetzDG tersebut? Dan kalau misalnya tadi dibilang ada masalah context sensitivity, maksudnya sulit untuk bagaimana mencari apakah sebuah post ini melanggar atau tidak, perlukah dari social media network sendiri itu melakukan semacam background check kepada pengguna usernya, sehingga tidak ada lagi pengguna yang anonim di user, misalnya di Facebook tidak ada lagi orang yang menciptakan akun-akun anonim seperti itu. Jadi ada akuntabilitas yang bisa diterapkan dalam penggunaan sosial media itu. Terima kasih.
Yang dimaksud pertanyaan kedua berarti social media platformnya apakah punya semacam assessment atau mencegah adanya akun anonim? Is it pretty clear for the last questions? Stephen from Remo TV asking about is there any regulation to prosecute the individual who posts the contents that infringe the NetzDG, and also the second one, is there any regulation by platform to push accountability on the anonym accounts, and how does it respond to the NetzDG as well? Okay, so maybe the first question.
I will try to share some thoughts on that. Very much thanks for the questions that you have brought up. If I understood it correctly, one thing about the prosecution of people who actually are making the statements, that is not affected by the Network Enforcement Act. I think it's very important to see that the Network Enforcement Act is very, very specific. It's just about specific platforms and their obligation to react to complaints. It's not about punishment of individuals and new rules in that respect. That has nothing to do with that. That is still done under the criminal law. And so if someone is affected, then he or she can complain in the normal system, and the state prosecutor will do research and so on. And in this research, they approach the social media platform, and then the social media platforms are required to give information. And that is something that is, of course, to some extent controversial as well. As you know, that we have very strict data protection laws in Europe, and there's a little bit of tension between the interest in getting information and the interest of people to be protected. But when the public prosecutor has investigated that and needs the information, then under German law, the prosecutor has the means to get the information from Facebook. And there is a specific, that's another complaints chain they have with social media. One is for the consumer when they complain, but there's another complaint chain for public institutions and how they can get information, and that would be this way. The Network Enforcement Act is not restricted to platforms, if I understood the question correctly, where the information is public. But it's also applicable to platforms where it's just among individual users. And so the concept as such is open, but the effect, of course, is not that problematic when other people cannot observe that. The policy, I think indirectly and directly, all of you mentioned the anonymity policy of different platforms. I personally see anonymity vis-à-vis the other users as one of the things that are extremely important to use the value of internet communication. A PhD student of mine did a study only on anonymity online and whether that's constitutionally protected, and his result was that it is covered, at least by the German constitution, that you are free to communicate without giving your name. That does not mean to say that companies are forced to offer you services where you can do that. That is, under German law, something that Facebook or other companies have to decide whether they want to offer that to their users or not. But it might have consequences for their liability for third-party content, but not under the NetzDG. As I said before, a lot of questions still under discussion, and the Network Enforcement Act only imposes obligations on platforms regarding their complaints mechanisms.
And I think there's also the second question about what's some current feature to limit the conversation, the user to forward only maximum 5 users. What do you think about that? Is it effective to reduce or to limit the circulation of the disinformation or hate speech, for instance?
I'm not a technician, and as far as I see it, it might be helpful in slowing down the distribution speed. And so far it can be helpful in this effect. I know that has been heavily criticized, this move, but on the other hand I think it's important to see what technical measures can do, and one of this is this. I think what is even more important, and what I'm sure the companies are doing, is that we learn more about distribution patterns. I think it was a colleague from MIT who told me that you can identify the fingerprint of fake news traveling through the internet because it has very often a specific distribution pattern. And when you have that, then of course you have the means to at least detect where there is a problem. I think these mechanisms are important, and we have to have a transparent discussion about that, but because what I do not want to see is that companies just detect that and then maybe shut down communication streams because they have seen, oh, there might be some problems, and so we hinder the communication here. But nevertheless, I think we can learn a lot from these technological ways to deal with the problem, and especially when it comes to the speed of fake news traveling.
Baik, kemudian saya buka karena kita masih punya waktu sekitar 14 menit. Akan saya buka kesempatan sesi kedua untuk bertanya. Mulai dari sini, lalu Pak Garin dan juga Mas di belakang.
Hello, Prof. Thank you for your sharing. It's very insightful. My name is Fiona Swana. I'm a researcher from Queensland University of Technology. So I'm just wondering, do you have any consideration or thoughts about the same moderation policy for every digital platform, YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook? Is it possible to have same moderation policy for this digital media platform? So when they get complaint, they have the same standard of policy to moderate this issue. It's only about that. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih. Selanjutnya,
Hi, Prof. My name is Tiki Dani. I'm a student PGP in London School of Public Relations. I'd just like to know, how does this new regulation being socialized in Germany, and how long until all the society knows about and understand about this new regulation? Thank you.
Selanjutnya terakhir Pak Garin.
Yes, quick questions. Which the organization within the German internet ecosystem that imposing this net enforcement act? Is it, in Indonesia case, is it like in the Minister of Informations? And then I note on the slide 24, once say a fake news is identified, then it's removed. So there must be some panel or some group team that will go through each of this. Is it also under the Minister of Information or any organization? And lastly, is there any follow up to these trying to ID them or chase these perpetrators, or just for now it's not, you're not up to that stage again, because this step involves intelligence network, and administrations. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Okay. Professor Wolfgang, for the first, second, and then the last questions. The first one about is it possible to apply same moderation policy to all kinds of social media platforms? And the second one will be how does the messaging socialize to the public and also to the social media platforms? How long does it take for the platforms to prepare their response to the message as well? And the last one from Pak Garin, it will be about the complaints handling on who is the authority and who's responsible to process the complaints, and does it also involve the other agencies, for instance, like the intelligence agency, to chase let's say, the person who posts or the organization who posts statement, for instance.
Yeah, thanks very much again for the questions. Very, very complex issues. I try to address them at least briefly. To the content moderation policy, that I think obviously it depends. I think it is possible, it has to be possible, that laws like the NetzDG are applied and there is compliance within the companies in the same way. And they are doing that in Germany. So all the companies have their procedures now. If you talk about that in a broader perspective, then of course the content moderation policies of the companies, or even within a company, the different platforms they offer are different. And they differ in terms, for example, of how sensitive they are to regional differences. There are some that want to have one platform rolled out more or less following the same content policy globally, and there are others that say, no, we cater to regional communities, and so we allow for different content standards and different content standard policies there. So if I understand it correctly, Facebook, for example, follows the policy as much on the global level as possible. They do not really want to have, of course they adjust to local law and they follow local law when they have to do this, but when it comes to their content standards, then they want to have a policy that covers all of the world in more or less the same manner. It's very complex internally already, but I think that's the bottom line there. But they are all capable of adjusting to requirements like the Network Enforcement Act, but it might change their service as it is, or as it was. So how the law was communicated and implemented, if that was the question, the network providers had half a year to prepare because the law came into effect or was published in summer 2017 and came fully into force at the January 1st in 2018. So there was some time to do that. There was a heavy debate in Germany, so I think it's one of the laws that more or less all the Germans know, because there have been media coverage and things like that. So that was because so many institutions had a say in that. The media themselves, they had the feeling that the law is not a good idea as it is, because they had felt the risk that their reporting would be deleted online. And so that was communicated very broadly in Germany, and still is discussed. We have now a flood of cases at the courts where people claim that their content has to be put back on Facebook. And courts see whether very complicated cases where the question plays a role whether Facebook is considered a public space, or that would be the term under US law, and there are specific requirements and that they have to observe freedom of speech of their users as well and cannot just moderate as they like. There is no consistent legal position on that, but some courts have issued decisions there. And the department, the Ministry of Justice is considering to having a kind of putback clause into a revised Network Enforcement Act as well. That is, on the one hand, an interesting approach. On the other hand, it would mean that it's a very narrow path for the platforms then. On the one hand, there is this incentive to remove. On the other hand, there's the risk that somebody sues them to put things up again. So that creates some tension as well. Who actually handles the complaints? That was one of the questions, if I got it right. That's a multi-layered system right now. So the big online platforms had set up new teams internally, And when there is a complaint, then these teams assess the content, and they have an escalation path there. When one content, the evaluator is not really sure, then he or she can move it to a next level, and even a law firm is hired to assess the content. So that's internally within the companies. Then there will be a new layer with this self-regulatory body. They have already 25 people that will act as reviewers, and when a case is brought to them from the platforms, then this reviewer team, or parts of them, will assess the content. And then there is the Office of Justice, overseeing the whole process from the state level, and they do not assess every case, but what they do is when someone complains with them, not with the platform, but with them, and says, my content has not been, or this content has not been removed by the platform, that is a violation of the Network Enforcement Act, then this person can complain with the Federal Office of Justice, and then they will check this case, this individual case. But as I said on one slide, there are not many cases on that level. So that's not many people complaining that the system would not work and that the providers would not comply with the Network Enforcement Act. And there was a notion about the offenders and what we do with them. That's up to the. That's not part of the Network Enforcement Act procedure. That's up to the public prosecutors to see whether there is a case, and they bring it before the courts. There is an initiative led by a state media authority, that is the institution that normally or traditionally reviews or regulates private broadcasters, and they have started an initiative together with NGOs and the industry to pick some cases and make them showcases. I mentioned that before already, that they say, okay, this person has to be prosecuted because of libel on a platform, so that the people in this community see and understand that you can be held accountable for this kind of speech online as you can offline as well. Because some people seem still to think that when I say it in this Facebook group, then it has no effects at all. And so that is done, but more on an exemplary basis.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wolfgang. I think before we close the discussions and Q&A sessions, I have one last question of mine. You mentioned about the state interference, that this NetsDG actually handling the intervention to the online platforms, not from the state. The state only provide the oversight. But in Indonesia case, the Ministry of Information and Communications, representing the state, of course, is actually doing the intervention to filter or to block or to remove any content. The ministry, they also receive complaints from public. They open channels for public to complain on contents within the social media, or perhaps even the private messaging platform like WhatsApp. And then the ministry will also send requests to the online platforms to remove or to usually remove the contents in the online platform. But the responses from the online platform itself, they say that some requests from the government, it is conflicted with their community guidelines. Like I think Mas Ibe from ICT Watch mentioned previously. So, in your perspective, how we should balance this countermeasure, or the measure from the government side and also the online platform side? Because, as you said, the NetsDG is now inspire other countries and sets the benchmark on how to handling these problems of hate speech and also disinformation. Is it from the government side? They might see that it is more convenient to hand over the responsibility or the liability to the online platforms. But on the other hand, the online platforms also hide that say that this is our community guideline and we have to protect the freedom of expression. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
That's an extremely complex question. I can only offer some thoughts on that because it goes to the very heart of the separation of roles in content moderation in the future. And maybe just a couple of thoughts. First of all, when the state does control communication, then I, as a human rights expert, have to say that these standards are very high. We have to have a clear-cut legal basis for that. We have to. It has to stand the proportionality test. It has to be necessary in a democratic society. So the traditional test of human rights have to be gone through. And I think when such a system is designed, it is very important to take care of these human rights standards, because we are talking about the freedom of public communication, which is the heart of any democracy, and important for all of us, for all people to inform themselves, to form their personality, and so on. So that's why, at least in Germany, the Federal Constitutional Court says that it is one of the most important fundamental rights we have, because it's about our personality and about our democracy. And secondly, of course, we have to see that we are talking about private platforms, and it's their product. Of course, they have to design their product in accordance with the law that has been democratically produced, but nevertheless, it is their product, and mechanisms have to make sure that we do not have a kind of taking over of those platforms by states. It's their business. And the tension between the content policy the companies have and the legal requirements, of course, when there has been a law that is in line with human rights and freedom of speech, then companies cannot argue that their individual content policies are overruling that, obviously. But on the other hand, it is good that we have that, because it is a kind of indicator of what freedom of speech means in other countries. And when companies tell us that under their community standards they can have this content all over the world, and one government says that violates the laws here, then at least it tells us something about that. So important is that it is a clear division of responsibility. What is the worst case, I would say, for freedom of speech is when you have a grey zone between the government and the companies. The government has to act in their field, and they have to respect the human rights. And we have, on the other hand, the companies that are acting under their paradigm, what has to do with their business model, but also protecting the freedom of speech of their users normally. And so I think that's, that is clear. The separation of responsibility is the most important thing here.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Wolfgang, for your presentations and discussions. Also, the audience, terima kasih untuk para peserta, karena waktu sudah menunjukkan hampir jam 12 dan saatnya break. Mungkin nanti ada beberapa peserta yang mengikuti sesi selanjutnya dari ICT Watch. Terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Mungkin dari benang merah yang sudah disampaikan dari hasil diskusi Profesor Wolfgang dan juga para peserta, apapun bentuk moderasi konten atau cara untuk moderasi konten, tentu ya kita semua perlu menghormati prinsip-prinsip hak asasi manusia dan perlu proporsional terhadap pengaturan dan juga tindakan-tindakan untuk merespon hate speech ataupun ujaran kebencian atau disinformasi. Terima kasih sekali lagi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Silakan Mbak Widuri, mungkin ada yang ingin disampaikan.
Terima kasih Mbak Afra atas moderasinya memimpin sesi pertanyaan siang hari ini. Dan kenapa pada saat ini nanti teman-teman seperti yang diketahui di depan ada pengumuman tidak diperbolehkan makan dan minum di sekitar auditorium, tapi panitia sudah menyediakan makan siang dengan dalam bentuk box yang teman-teman bisa nikmati di lantai 3 atau di lantai 4 kafetaria dari Perpusnas ini. Karena waktunya profesor juga sedikit ada di Jakarta hanya sampai dengan sore ini karena harus kembali terbang ke tempat lain, maka kami sudahi dulu acara kuliah umum ini yang nantinya teman-teman semua yang mendaftar di registrasi akan menerima sertifikat online, juga akan menerima summary dari hasil kuliah umum hari ini. Kami akan kirimkan melalui email yang teman-teman sudah cantumkan di registrasi. Mohon ditunggu sekitar 3 atau 4 hari ke depan gitu ya, karena nggak bisa cepat. Itu, dan profesor akan kami ajak kembali menuju ke ruang fokus group discussion yang akan kami laksanakan di lantai 9. Sayangnya diskusi tersebut tertutup, sudah berdasarkan dengan undangan, jadi hasilnya nanti teman-teman juga bisa diinformasikan. Demikian, terima kasih sekali lagi atas kehadiran teman-teman semua yang sudah hadir di sini. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.